buying back your shares. It's a lot like what the private equity model we've seen across retail sector. We saw Toys R Us just go bankrupt. They're shutting down hundreds of stores. They're having liquidation sales everywhere. And they were driven out of business intentionally, really, by private equity firm that bought it with their own assets, the stock value of Toys R Us, and then gave themselves $400 million. The whole company collapsed. People that were working there for 33 years get zero. These guys who came in for a few months destroyed it, and then, now it's left as a carcass. And that is essentially what Apple is doing at the end of the day. It might be a longer term, and there might be some fancy products in the meantime, but Wolf Street says about how the tax legislation, the new law has basically incentivized these share buybacks. He says the note trim tabs provided as to why these share buybacks are suddenly blowing off the charts is key. The corporate tax law has changed concerning the repatriation of overseas cash that represents many years of untaxed profits invested mostly in U.S. treasuries and corporate bonds. This quote-unquote repatriation is a one-time affair. Once these limited so-called overseas cash has been repatriated and spent on share buybacks, dividends, and executive bonus is gone. And then what? These immensely overvalued shares will then have to find real buyers. But for now, companies are selling their treasuries and corporate bonds, which have taken a beating recently, and are using the proceeds while they last to buy back their own shares at historically overvalued prices.
Right. You mentioned leverage buyouts there. So instead of a company doing a leverage buyout and buying another company, they're doing a leverage buyout of themselves. They borrow lots of money and they buy back their own stock, and they're taking themselves private, and they're taking the entire S&P 500 private. And the people who are left will be private equity stock owners who run the economy without any participation at all from the general public, who already owns less than 20% of the stock market, owned by the average mom and pop out there. Soon that'll drop down to less than 1%. And then you'll have what's the new road to serfdom. This is the new road to the American serfdom.
Yeah. And in terms of Toys R Us, by the way, going bankrupt last week and liquidating, New Jersey politicians where they were shutting down operations were like, oh, this is horrible, and this is not capitalism, but that is what we have.
Toys R Us didn't go bankrupt. That's like saying a man that was shot in the chest got in the way of a bullet that happened to be flying in that direction. They did not go bankrupt. There was a concerted effort by private equity to load the company full of debt in exchange for cash. That cash went onto the books of the private equity group. The debt stayed on Toys R Us. It's unsustainable debt, and it was a manufactured collapse. Just like a mafia don will bankrupt a restaurant or something of that nature by having to take on a lot of debt for the insurance money. Here they're taking on a lot of debt for the equity extraction that was engineered by the private equity firm. This is mafia economics.
Yeah, but who's on the other side of that debt? Somebody loaned them that money against the assets.
Well, the bank loans the money, and if ever the bank can't meet the obligations of their own books, they go to the federal government for another bailout. It's called keeping interest rates at 0%. If interest rates were at more than 0%, there would be no money for these mafia-like leverage buyouts and stock repurchases. If interest rates are going high in the short term and the cost of fraud and the cost of terrorism goes up, then there'll be less of it, as I've been saying for years. The way to stop financial terrorism is to reduce the cost of financial terrorism, raise interest rates. But Janet Yellen and now this new guy, Powell, are in the business of enabling financial terrorists, and that's America. It's the American gulag.
So Wolf Richter calls these stock buybacks crash insurance, but with an expiration date. Obviously, that once they repatriate all this overseas cash, then it's going to melt down. But the fact is also on top of this, it's been announced in the last week or two, all these corporations, remember at first, I think as kind of a quid pro quo to the art of the deal maker, Trump, they announced all these, like, we're going to give everybody $1,000 bonus while we ourselves collect billions in bonuses, are personally the heads of these corporations. But we're going to give $1,000 bonus, or we're going to increase pay. This is what they said as a result of the tax law. But if you see, they actually announced, and of course, this bit got overlooked because Trump didn't call attention to it. And the media only covers what Trump points to in a tweet that day. So the fact is they announced that no more increases in pay, no more bonuses. And in fact, they'll probably start cutting jobs and cutting salaries. There's no plan to increase wages over the next year, despite the fact that their tax rate is now a fraction, half of what it was last year.
John D. Rockefeller used to walk down the street handing out dimes. There he is, Donald Trump, handing out $1,000 bills, which, accounting for inflation, have the purchasing power of a dime back in Johnny D. Rockefeller's day, approximately.
Yes, but he called a lot of attention via his tweets to those $1,000 bonuses that a few companies gave. But it was only a tiny percentage of their gains that they had from the tax cuts. And now, of course, Trump is not calling attention to the fact that they're now going to start cutting wages and probably clawing back that $1,000 they gave you in order to keep the population sedated about their own benefit from the tax cuts.
I miss those days of the war bonds. They used to get Americans to buy
really old.
junk bonds, to finance World War II. At least you had some good rah, go kill the enemy type films in Hollywood, and It Was a Wonderful Life, and you had Frank Capra movies, and you remember that, America, Norman Rockwell? Now you've got people fornicating the turkey on Thanksgiving dinner and stabbing Santa Claus in the back, and they call that America.